is now Van Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the Pathfinder role-playing game system. Where we last left off, we've been diving in through all of magic items, and I began talking about artifacts. Today, I'm going to talk to you about major artifacts, and I'm going to start talking to you about creating your own. But let's first start out with, of course, major artifacts, because we did talk about minor ones last week. The difference that major ones, there can only ever be one copy of a major artifact. Also, they do tend to be more powerful in a way. The fact is that a major artifact's power should be enough to upturn the very balance and the very systems of a campaign. Effectively, a lot of what goes on in a campaign could be altered by the sheer existence of this powerful magic item. Much more so than would be for a minor artifact. Though again, both could definitely upturn and change how things work within a campaign setting because of their general power level. Now, it is also important to note that unlike other magic items and other artifacts, these cannot be easily destroyed ever. There is only one process to destroy a major artifact, and it will be listed under that. Only one thing that can be done. When we talked about the minors, we said that it was more than likely that was the easiest way to do it, though there may possibly be more ways to destroy the minor artifacts. But no, major, you have to follow the procedure that's listed there in order to destroy, and that is the only way. Now let's begin to talk about creating your own magic items. The fact is that most spellcasters could theoretically create their own magic items, but it has the requirements of taking certain feats. These unique feats allow a spellcaster to begin to create their own magic items. The other things that are going to be associated with it are time and cost. So once you meet these three requirements, you can make a magic item. At the end of whatever process you take, after all the time, after you spent the money, after you had those feats, you effectively create a magic item. But it isn't just as simple as taking all that. It requires a skill check. Now, most of the time, it will be a spellcraft check, though certain other magic items will call for different skill checks. If a magic item would call for possibly one or more different types of skill checks, you choose one, and you only have to roll that one. The base DC is, of course, 5, plus the caster level of the item you're creating to determine whether or not you are successful. If you fail this, the magic item does not function, you wasted all that time, you wasted all the money you spent trying to make it in the first place. If you fail by 5 or more on this check, you've made a cursed item. And we talked about cursed items, so that's the process that you take. You've failed by enough, it's cursed instead. Now, magic items will have prerequisites in order to create them. Each one of them will list its own sets of prerequisites. Most of the prerequisites tend to be, of course, spells. Now, this doesn't mean that you as the caster particularly have to know them. Most of the time you do have to know them. But should you have another magic item or another spellcaster be able to provide you with these spells over a reasonable period of time, effectively a long period of time that you're creating this magical item, then effectively you could replace yourself during this time knowing this spell to be able to create this magic item. You're basically jury-rigging it with something else. This actually doesn't mean also you actually need that anyway. For most prerequisites, you could theoretically ignore these prerequisites, but each one that you do not qualify for when you are creating a magic item increases the DC to create it by 5. So the more prerequisites you're missing, the more difficult it gets over and over and over again. Yes. There are some exceptions to this though. The item creation feats you cannot ignore. You need to have them no matter what. As soon as you have the item creation feats, when you don't have the spells or you don't have the other prerequisites, yeah, I can make the DC harder to do, but that item creation feat, I need it. And the other thing is if you have a spell completion item or a spell trigger item that you are creating, you need the spells for those. You cannot ignore those spells for those because of the nature of these things. So that's another one that you need them. Now, we will be talking about cost of magic items a little bit more in the future, but there are two main factors that we want to talk about now. The caster level of the creator of the magic item, and the spell level of the spells being used in the creation of it. Now, for caster level, the creator of the magic item can always choose to use a lower caster level in creation of that magic item to a minimum of what the minimum would be to cast the spells that are being used. So if I'm using a 3rd level spell and my caster level is 10, I could instead use a caster level of 5. It's going to half the price because remember, caster level is a factor. The other way is you can technically affect spell level. Now, you can't really lower spell level, but with meta magic feats, you could raise spell level. Now, this would make it more expensive, but there are reasons to do that. There are reasons behind things like a heightened spell. It increases the DC because spell level is a factor in DC. So I might want to use those meta magics to increase my spell level and make my magic item more potent. I'm willing to spend that extra money. Now, in order to create a magic item, you're going to need a number of magical supplies. The number of magical supplies will have a gold piece value equal to half of the base price of the magic item. We'll again talk about factoring out the base price of it later on. Most of the time, for most magic items, base price will equal to market price. This isn't a necessity. There are things that can make this different. For example, weapons, armors, and shields, and similar items, they will have a price equivalent to whatever the base item is, that armor, weapon, or shield, beyond just the base price to make it magical. So there are two bases here, which add together to get your market price, but I don't factor in the price of purchasing the armor, the price of purchasing the weapon, the price of purchasing the shield, into my base price to figure out how much I have to spend in order to enchant this, in order to make it magical. So you can see here, my market price is already going to be different. Another exception is spells that have expensive material costs to them. These expensive material costs are not added to the base price. You still have to supply these expensive material costs as part of casting these spells, or if the item itself is mimicking a spell that uses expensive material component. These will be added on to the market price in the end, but you do not have to worry about them being part of the base price when you're originally creating the item itself and for the materials you need. Again, you will actually have to supply these materials for this anyway. So it will have a requirement of this materials. So it's exactly the same as the armor and weapon, that it adds to the market value, but you also have to pay for it, because you do. Majority of magic items will list any kind of extra costs created you required part of the creation, and will let you know what the general total costs are, including things like final price and sometimes base price, information that are required you to help you out in figuring out creating magic items, if you're using one of the common ones in the book. Now, when you're creating a magic item, you require a place that is quiet, peaceful, and is well lit. Effectively, the same kind of place that you require to memorize spells would be useful for creating magic items. You can effectively take 8 hours out of a day, and for every 8 hours you take, you get 1,000 gold pieces worth of progress made. You have to do this a number of times, equivalent to the base price. So basically, you divide the base price by 1,000, that tells you how many 8-hour increments it's going to take you to make this magic item. All magic items require a minimum of 8 hours of work, with the exceptions of scrolls and potions. These have their own set of timing rules. If a scroll or potion is less than 250 gold pieces, it will require you 2 hours of work. If it's above 250 but less than 1,000, it will require you to use that 8 hours worth of work in order to create that potion or that scroll. Above 1,000, it's going to use the normal rules. So even if it's 1,001 gold pieces, it'll take me 2 days. Regardless, you can only work on one magic item at a time. You really can. You can only work on one at a time. So that means you can't work on more than one magic item at a time. And you could only work 8 hours in a day. That's the maximum you could work. Now, you don't have to spend these days consistently, but you can speed up the process. Oh, the thing is, I'm going to importantly note it here. Whenever you speed up the process, it doesn't matter if you only did it one time, it will still affect the entire creation of the magic item. So if you speed it up, you might as well continue to speed it up. Effectively, when you're speeding it up, you reduce the time to 4 hours per 1,000 gold pieces worth of work. This would mean I could get 2 sessions of 1,000 gold pieces in and get twice the amount of work done, 2,000 gold pieces a day. The result of this is actually just adding to the DC of creating the magic item. Increases by 5. So that DC that you're going to have to make at the end of this entire time to see if you successfully created the item increases by 5. So that's it, though. That's all that is affected by this. Increase of the DC. But if it didn't really matter to you, you could very easily increase the amount of work you're doing, make it more difficult. Well, you could double, basically, the amount of work you're getting done in a day, at best. So, that's it for today. I first finished talking about artifacts just by talking about major artifacts. Now, as I talked about last week, there are a number of minor artifacts, but there are also a number of major artifacts listed in the book. Theoretically speaking, these are good points in time which you can use as examples to create your own if you really, really needed to. But it would be more suggested that you would use one of these, or there are always other artifact examples and various other materials that you could use and basically add them into your campaign if you really need an artifact. If you don't need one, do not bother. But artifacts, again, should hold a key position in your story if you're going to add them in. They should be important to what's going on. You shouldn't just get them for no reason. They should do something to the story. Then I moved on to talking about making your own magic items. I, of course, talked about the 3 requirements. A feat, some time, and some money. Now, granted, this is technically not the only requirements, but if you at least had these things, you could make the magic item. Now, there are usually some kind of prerequisites that if you don't meet them, it just becomes more difficult to do the entire thing. And you do have that check at the end of creating it to see if you succeed, you fail, or you make something cursed. So we did talk about those prerequisites. And some basics. Some basics of the cost that's going to have for you, and some of the rules for that, and the kind of place that you're going to be working on, and the kind of time it's going to take. So we did talk a little bit about cost, time, and all the prerequisites. Those that you need, and those that you can ignore if you want to make it that your check to succeed in the magic item is harder. But you could ignore it. In the next episode, we will dive more into item creation and start getting into talking about costing your magic items. And then talk a little bit about specifically different types of magic items we've discussed over the course of these episodes and how you would make each of those. They each have their own little rules that will be important to go over. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It's just for the channel, the empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you could always check out my Patreon, link description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.